This lesson will focus on the delete method on the Hibernate API. When we invoke the delete method and pass in an entity, Hibernate will change the entity's state to removed, which removes the entity from the persistence context, and then the entity will be subsequently removed from the database when we commit our transaction or flush our session. To begin, we're going to sync up our data model. So we're just going to run the populate script, and this will truncate all of our tables and insert some data into the bank table. We can then select some records from the bank table, and this is what you should see in your database. Now we're going to work on deleting some of these records by using the remove method on the Hibernate API. So let's get started. The first thing you'll notice is that we open a new session, and this will create a new persistence context. Once we have opened our session, we then create a transaction. Within this transaction, we will perform all of our work. The first thing we'll need to do is grab an entity from the database. We're going to use the session.get method, and we're going to supply the class as well as the value of the identifier, and then we're going to cast the bank entity. So at this point, this entity would be in the persistent state. What we want to do is take the session and invoke the delete operation, and we pass in our entity to the delete method. Just to show some of the internals of Hibernate, I'm going to print out method invoked. So after we delete our bank entity, we're going to log some output to the console, and we're also going to show that the session at one point contained the bank entity, and then at another point, it no longer contains the bank entity. Here we have the basics of performing a delete, and this will cause the entity to move from the persistent state into the removed state. So let's go ahead and run this example. Let's see our output. So first we see this select, and that's because we invoked the get operation. And then we see that the entity is part of the session, so it's within the persistence context. And then you'll notice that we have invoked the delete method. However, we do not see the delete operation being invoked at this time, so it's not sending a delete operation to the database. Then we move on to our debugging output that says the bank entity is no longer part of the session. However, it still hasn't been removed from the database. Finally, once we commit our transaction, then Hibernate syncs up the entity model and data model, and we actually issue the delete statement to the database. And we also see that Hibernate is deleting a bank contact record as well as the bank record. So there must have been an association there that we had to destroy before we could delete the bank record. Let's return to our application, and I just want to make one more quick point. Once we have deleted the bank entity, we should no longer be working with that entity within our code. The entity has been removed and it no longer has an identity within the database. So once you have removed that bank object, it's best to let garbage collection kick in and basically remove that object from your application.